They need us more than we need them. That phrase has been haunting me for 48 hours as I watch what feels like the most catastrophic economic decision I've witnessed unfold before my eyes. For decades, I've observed this quiet arrogance in Washington. This belief that Canada is just America's attic, a friendly, snowy place where we keep spare resources until needed. A 51st state in everything but name. The assumption seemed logical. America holds the cards. America has the consumer market. America has the military. If push came to shove, Canada would fold. Well, as of this morning, Sunday, January 25th, 2026, I'm witnessing what happens when the nice guy snaps. According to reports I'm tracking, 48 hours ago, President Trump signed Executive Order 109, imposing a 25% tariff on all Canadian imports. Energy, lumber, aluminum, everything. The goal was forcing Ottawa to renegotiate the USMCA on terms that would surrender their sovereignty over natural resources. The White House expected polite Canadians to fly to D.C. begging for a waiver. But what I'm seeing unfold is something Wall Street didn't price in. Reports suggest Trudeau didn't just issue counter-tariffs. According to unverified information, he invoked the National Strategic Reserve Act. He didn't tax exports, he banned them. As I'm monitoring this, reports suggest the Enbridge mainline valves are closing. Trains carrying potash to the Midwest are stopping at the border. Uranium shipments destined for American nuclear plants have been grounded. What I'm watching isn't just a sneeze. It feels like cardiac arrest. I'm seeing gas prices in the Midwest jump 80 cents overnight. The Chicago Board of Trade suspended trading on wheat futures because the fertilizer panic is so severe. And the U.S. Department of Energy just issued a red alert for the Texas power grid, not because of cold, but because the refineries that feed it are starving. Let me walk you through what I'm learning about energy independence, because this is shaking everything I thought I knew. Looking at the map, to understand the White House panic, I've had to dig into oil chemistry. We've been told for 10 years that the U.S. is energy independent. We frack the Permian Basin. We pump millions of barrels daily. We export oil globally. So why does it matter if Canada cuts us off? Here's the dirty secret nobody talks about. The mismatch. The oil from Texas is light, sweet crude, thin like water and low in sulfur. Great stuff. But here's the problem. The massive Gulf Coast refineries weren't built for light, sweet crude. They were built in the 1990s to process heavy, sour crude. This is thick, sludge-like oil from Venezuela, Mexico, and Canada. These refineries are like massive digestive systems. They invested billions in cokers and crackers designed to break down heavy sludge. Feed them only light Texas oil and they don't work efficiently. They run at 60% capacity. They can't make enough diesel. They malfunction. For the last 5 years, since sanctions cut off Venezuela and Mexican production dropped, the U.S. refining system has had one lifeline: Canadian oil sands. Canada sends 4 million barrels of heavy crude south daily through the Keystone Pipeline, Enbridge mainline, and by rail. It's the blood in U.S. industrial veins. When the president slapped tariffs on Canadian energy, he thought he was taxing a competitor. But I'm realizing he was taxing his own supply chain. And Canada didn't just accept the tax. They played the China card. For years, the U.S. blocked pipelines like Keystone XL because they trapped Canadian oil in the North American market. If Canada can't send it to the coast, they sell to the U.S. at a discount. It's called the WCS discount, Western Canadian Select. It saves U.S. drivers billions yearly. But last year, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion opened. Canada now has a pipe to the Pacific. Yesterday, reports suggest the Canadian Energy Minister announced a strategic partnership with CNOOC, the Chinese state oil giant. They've committed to buying every barrel the U.S. rejects. Tankers are already lining up in Vancouver. So what I'm watching happen to the Midwest feels catastrophic. The Midwest relies on Canadian oil for 70% of its refinery feedstock. 70%. Without that oil, the refineries in Illinois, Ohio, and Minnesota have to shut down. You cannot ship Texas oil north overnight. There are no pipelines going north-south in that volume. Infrastructure is built north to south or west to east. I'm looking at gas stations in Chicago, Detroit, and Minneapolis running dry in 72 hours. Not high prices, no gas. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is mostly medium sour crude. It can help, but can't replace 4 million barrels daily of specific heavy grade. Even if it could, the SPR is in the Gulf, not the Midwest. What feels like arrogance, this "we don't need Canada" mentality, ignored the physical reality of the pipeline map. We built a continent-wide energy machine, assuming the border didn't exist. Now that the border feels like a wall, the machine appears broken. If I think the gas lines are bad, what I'm hearing about the electric situation is terrifying. The United States generates 20% of its electricity from nuclear power. It's the base load, what keeps lights on when wind isn't blowing and sun isn't shining. But here's a terrifying fact. The U.S. produces almost zero uranium. We import 95% of reactor fuel. Where did we get it? Russia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan. But in 2024, Congress banned Russian uranium imports to punish Putin. That left us with one reliable, secure, massive supplier: Canada. The Athabasca Basin in Saskatchewan is the Saudi Arabia of uranium. Cigar Lake and McArthur River mines produce the highest grade uranium on Earth. Cameco keeps the U.S. nuclear fleet running. When this trade war started, the White House assumed nuclear fuel would be exempt. It wasn't. Reports suggest Ottawa designated uranium a critical national security asset and paused all export licenses to the U.S. pending security review. This feels like checkmate. Nuclear plants run on fuel cycles of 18 to 24 months. They don't have years of inventory. Some plants are due for refueling this spring. If they don't get fuel bundles, they power down. If we lose 20% of grid capacity as summer approaches, I'm looking at rolling blackouts across the eastern seaboard. And unlike oil, you can't just buy uranium on the spot market. It has to be mined, milled, converted, enriched, and fabricated. The supply chain takes years. Canada knows this. They know that without their yellow cake, U.S. Navy aircraft carriers don't sail and lights in Washington, D.C. go out. Energy keeps us moving. Uranium keeps us warm. But what I'm learning about next, this one keeps us alive. I need to talk about potash. It's a pink salt. I've probably never thought about it, but if I eat food, I depend on it. Potash is the K in NPK fertilizer. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. You cannot grow corn, soy, or wheat at industrial scales without it. The plants get weak. They don't yield. The food supply collapses. The world has 3 main potash sources: Russia and Belarus, sanctioned, unreliable, difficult to ship; Canada, Saskatchewan. Everyone else? Tiny amounts. Saskatchewan alone produces nearly 1/3 of the world's supply. But more importantly, it supplies 85% of the potash used by American farmers. 85%. We don't have a backup. There are no massive potash mines in Iowa. When Trump slapped the 25% tariff on all Canadian minerals, he effectively put a 25% tax on every bushel of corn grown in America. But Canada didn't just let us pay the tax. They stopped the trains. The Premier of Saskatchewan, acting with the Prime Minister, has cited supply chain instability and halted rail shipments south. Farmers in the Corn Belt are sitting on tractors staring at empty barns. They need that fertilizer now. If they don't put it in the ground in April, there's no crop in October. If Canada keeps the potash north of the border for 30 days, we miss the planting window. Yields could drop by 30 to 40%. What I'm realizing this could do to the price of food terrifies me. Corn feeds the cows. Soy feeds the chickens. The price of beef, chicken, milk, eggs, and bread could double. This feels to me like a breakfast tax, and it's entirely self-inflicted. For 100 years, it seems to me the US and Canada have been like a married couple. We bicker, but we sleep in the same bed. The assumption in Washington, as I've observed it, was that Canada has nowhere else to go. They are landlocked to the US. They share our culture, They are trapped. That might have been true in 1990. From what I'm seeing, it is not true in 2026. This morning, according to reports, the Canadian Trade Minister announced something called the Pacific Gateway Initiative. Ottawa, based on sources, is slashing regulations to fast-track LNG terminals on the West Coast. They are fast-tracking critical mineral exports to Japan, South Korea, and yes, China. What I'm reading from RBC calls it the dependency trap exit strategy. Canada, it appears to me, is realizing that being 70% dependent on the US for trade is a national security risk. They seem willing to take a short-term recession to break that chain. This feels like a nightmare scenario for the Pentagon as I see it. We rely on Canada for NORAD. The radar stations that detect Russian missiles over the Arctic are on Canadian soil. We rely on Canadian aluminum to build our F-35 fighter jets. According to defense sources, Canada provides 70% of U.S. aluminum imports. We rely on Canadian steel for our tanks. If Canada decides to become neutral in this trade war, if they say, "We will trade with everyone equally," suddenly it feels to me like the U.S. defense industrial base has a gaping hole in it. We can't build jets without their metal. We can't fly them without their fuel. We can't spot incoming missiles without their land. How does this end? It ends with a phone call. The president picks up, calls Ottawa, and blinks. Because the math is undeniable. We can hurt Canada. We can crush their GDP. We can cause a Toronto recession. But Canada can stop our cars. They can starve our crops. They can turn off our lights. What feels clear to me is that the pain tolerance of a resource-rich nation is always higher than the pain tolerance of a consumer-rich nation. Canadians can burn wood to stay warm and eat their own wheat. Americans cannot eat iPhones. This trade war has exposed what feels to me like the fragility of the American empire. We expanded our influence globally, but forgot to secure our own backyard. We treated our closest ally like a vassal state, and now I feel like we are paying the price. The "we don't need Canada" movement was a bluff, and Canada just called it.